Let's give another 30 seconds for others to join us. Okay, let's get started. Yeah, welcome everyone. Today is 2022, January 31st. Wow. This is the Kubernetes Migration Working Group bi-weekly sync up. So let's get to the agenda items first. What's being done? Amy, you want to verbalize what has been done?
Yeah, thank you. So just to mention that we've officially wrapped up the pages migration. So we had just one bug outstanding on that's now been resolved. So the epic has been closed. So thanks for everyone who helped out there. And alongside that, the rate limiting Redis cluster migration work is going along. So far, we've validated that we can run as a hybrid deployment. That's kind of been the big thing. So we are now sort of working to pursue that approach.
Thank you. That's great. Any questions about what has been done? Okay, then let's move on to what's happening next.
Great. So we'll be continuing to work on the rate limiting Redis migration. Big part we're kind of doing at the moment is we need to upgrade our Redis instances. So what we're finding at the moment is as we spin things up with Kubernetes, they come up on the latest version. Our VMs are not currently running on our latest version, which means we are running a mixture. So we're doing the Redis upgrade at the moment, and then we'll be continuing to try and move ahead to deploy onto Pre in the next week or so.
That's cool. Thank you. Thank you for the update. Move on to the blockers. So I will verbalize John's comment. Is John here?
No, I don't think it's his time zone.
No, he's
okay. Yeah, okay, I'll just verbalize. So basically, had trouble configuring the environment with Prefix running in the Kubernetes while the GitLab nodes are outside of GitLab Kubernetes. So could be documentation gap, or could be there are some product gaps here. So unclear right now, but I had two questions here. The first one was do we intend to run this hybrid mode for GitLab, like Prefix in Kubernetes, but GitLab outside of Kubernetes?
So I think if it's possible, like if it's a possible approach, we would certainly consider it. So I believe from the testing that GitLab into Kubernetes could be tricky, and Prefix may be an easier first step. So I think it's if we have options to migrate something, we can certainly look to it. But I don't think it would be, we would necessarily choose this to be the long-term setup, like just purely based on wanting it to be hybrid.
Okay, so hybrid is a first step towards fully migrating the GitLab hosting to Kubernetes. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So that sounds iterative approach. Then we do need to sort this out, where the gap is, whether it's a documentation or a product gap here. Sounds right.
I'd agree. GitLab itself has its own issues that are being worked in a separate issue in terms of running well in Kubernetes. Prefix, effectively, the application nodes are stateless. So there's something that is more easily translated into the Kubernetes environment. What I will point out is that this chart was never fully developed in the sense that everything else was. So that's why it doesn't seem to work that way right now. It doesn't.
Okay. So what do we need to do to identify those gaps, whether it's documentation or product? What do we need to do here? I guess we need to discover those gaps through testing, right? Or
there's no need to test. I can tell you right now, it is not implemented to be able to configure Prefect to use external Gitly. It is not
Okay.
currently implemented.
Okay. Okay. So that sounded like we are blocked to do this hybrid deployment.
Well, I think there's a couple things to mention here. I'm sorry, my video is not working, so I can't get my camera online. But there's two different things we need to make sure we're understanding correctly. There's Prefect and Gitly cluster, which is currently not functional in Kubernetes, to what Jason has said. And then there's Gitly, which is functional in Kubernetes. So the Gitly nodes necessary for a cluster deployment are what we can't currently reference through Kubernetes. If you wanted to run Gitly without Prefect, it works just fine in Kubernetes. We actually have customers utilizing that. Whether or not this is best practice or not, we can discuss, but it does, from my understanding, function.
It does technically function. There are problems.
Correct.
But so I'm specifically referring to Gitly cluster, which is Prefect combined with Gitly. I'm saying just Prefect.
Yes,
So
I agree with that
just
100%.
that is currently not implemented in such a way that its backing nodes can be outside of Kubernetes. Currently
Yes.
designed so it's a fully contained instance.
Jason, I believe you're 100% correct. I completely agree with that sentiment. I just want to make sure people are clear that Gitly versus Gitly cluster are very different things that have very different architectures. And while one may work, the other does not.
Okay. So I'm gonna rephrase a little bit here to make a little more clarity. You can use Helm Kubernetes deploy GitLab with an external Gitly cluster. The Prefect service itself cannot use external Gitly nodes. You can use a Prefect instance as though it were Gitly itself, because it's a pass-through proxy. But if you run that inside of Kubernetes, the Helm charts currently don't support actually configuring it to use external pre-existing nodes.
Thank you, Jack. That was very clear, and that was my understanding as well.
Can I
So,
ask then, is this what we want? Do we want to do this? So I know this testing is around, so the sort of end goal is to get Gitly and Prefect both into Kubernetes. But I'm wondering, like, is this actually a goal we want to achieve? Like, as it sounds like either way, we're going to have to prioritize work around it or find some workarounds. But is this actually something we want to be doing?
So right now, how many cluster instances do we have in production?
That we know about, we have around 100 that are reporting through usage ping, and those 100 account for the.
How many do we have?
Oh.
Not how many do customers have? How many do we have?
you mean GitLab.com, right?
Yes.
Do we run Gitly clusters on GitLab.com?
I don't think we have many.
We don't have many. www GitLab repo is on cluster. I don't know of the specifics behind which cluster that is on and what other things may or may not be on that cluster.
And this is what I'm asking is how many clusters do we have? Not how many projects do we have on cluster or anything else? Like literally how many instances of cluster do we have? If we have one and we're not using it for everybody else, I wonder if that's what we should be focused on right now. Don't get me wrong, the chart should be further improved. Hasn't been priority from a product standpoint. We've been working on more impactful things for the sake of production and customers. But do we need to do this right now?
And also your point is still alpha. The Prefect chart is still alpha status. So if we put it in production, we probably need to prioritize this to make it GA.
it's going to need a refactor, and it's going to need looked through. It's going to need cleaned up. Yeah.
Dylan, maybe we can sync up with Amy offline to see, the schedule and how this fits into our distributions schedule.
Sure. Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was going to hop in and say anything, but we have been talking about what it would take to recommend the chart on the same level as we recommend Omnibus. So if we work down that path of essentially lovable maturity for the chart, this work would overlap. I know that this meeting is more about us internally, but that would help the maturity of our chart. And essentially in the future, we might only recommend or higher level recommend the chart over Omnibus. So this all leads to that, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. So
And in terms of John's testing, should we have him pause? Should we have him configure only Giddily and not Prefect? How should we have John move forward on the testing work he's doing?
Right now, I'm reviewing some of his comments, but he is accurate in saying that he's had problems getting it to actually work because, as he notes in his comments, it's not designed to do what he's trying to do. So we need engineering work on this chart in order to do what he's attempting to test, which is Prefect in cluster, Italy out of cluster. And that the chart is very much not designed to do that right now.
So we want to pause on the testing. But my understanding, Prefect works in the Kubernetes and with an external Gitly. So do we want to test that scenario to prepare the migration?
External Giddily works fine. Because of that, if you have an external Prefect, external Giddily cluster, that works fine because the application addresses them as the same. Prefect cannot run with external Giddily nodes to make up a Giddily cluster. So right now, that chart can't do what John's attempting to test. Not engineered to be able to do so.
So we should pause that testing.
I mean, my
Something like
gut reaction on this is it's more important to ensure that Giddily, not Prefect, works within the chart first as a building block and a foundational block. If we get that working and we're happy with the testing results from that, then we can decide between Dylan, myself, and the internal team what makes the most sense for us to tackle as far as getting Prefect and its corresponding nodes within a Kubernetes cluster. Right now, I will say that we have not run into, in the customers I've talked to, a huge demand for that. I recognize we're focusing internal, but I will say that I have not received huge demand externally either for an internal to Kubernetes Prefect cluster.
I do see customer requests and even sometimes some work coming in from external parties, and we recognize and value those contributions, but it's not a lot. Every once in a while, one or two parties comes in and makes a whole bunch of noise for good reason. But as Mark said, customer-wise, other than a bunch of people going, "Why isn't this default?" and us having to go, "Well, it can't work that way yet."
I actually receive much more demand for Giddily, not cluster, internal to Kubernetes. They want a Kubernetes deployment to replace Omnibus with everything for a standalone, non-clustered install in Kubernetes. And we still, in our reference architectures, recommend against that. That's a whole different topic, but that to me is more important to test and achieve maturity on as a first step, because I think that will satisfy a lot of the customers who are requesting Kubernetes.
So Amy, what is our migration plan? Like we run Gitly in Kubernetes and leave Prefect out. Is that a acceptable scenario or first step towards full migration? If that's the scenario we can accept, then maybe we switch our testing direction towards testing Gitly in Kubernetes.
Absolutely. I mean, I think so. I think we've landed at the what is going to be the most straightforward. But yeah, if we're saying that Gitly is going to be more straightforward and actually a better thing to have in Kubernetes, then absolutely. I believe from sort of conversations last year, it had more unknowns, like there's more complexity, but yeah, absolutely. If we're happy that we can test and show that Gitly will work, Prefect out, then we can work with that.
I mean, from a purely numbers perspective from our customers, the vast majority of them do not use Prefect or cluster. To be fair, the ones that do are very high value, high ARR, very important customers. But from a pure numbers perspective, the vast majority by a long shot do not use cluster. And they're the ones that are going to benefit the most from Helm charts being updated to run Gitly in native Kubernetes as a deployment option.
Recommended.
Yes, recommended. Correct. Thank you.
Cool. That sounds a path forward. So Wincy, can we just redirect the testing path or direction to testing the Gitly in Kubernetes with a Prefect outside?
Yep, we'll do that.
Okay, that sounds a plan.
Yeah, and then we can still talk about, I guess, what our plans are for this quarter, Chun. But basically, we have some efficiency projects that we're going to work on and move cloud native maturity more into Q2. And so I was going to probably get with Mark to chat about Q2 more on that timeline.
Yeah, that sounds good too, because now we switched our direction. So Prefect chart probably you can wait for a little bit more time.
Yeah, well, also I meant any work we can do a little bit of work, but any work related to Gitly in Helm, we'll probably do in Q2.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So let's just continue our testing towards Gitly in Kubernetes. See how that works. Then circle back to see how ready we are. Change our rollout plan. Cool. Okay. Thank you, everyone. This is a good discussion. Yeah, then move on to the discussion section. Check time. We only have 8 minutes. So Amy, your question you want to verbalize?
It's all so point 5, I believe, is covered all by the discussion we've just had. So that's all great. But 6, I wanted to just mostly just share. So this has come from staging ref, but I've opened up an issue so we can discuss keeping infra changes sort of reflected in reference architecture, or whether we want to do that or how we want to do that. So if anyone wants to join in, there's the link.
Thank you, Amy, for creating that issue. At an initial glance, I would say yes, because we do want to have staging ref as close to production, so that could be considered as a good testing environment, as you pointed out. Otherwise, it would invalidate the testing if there are changes. At this point, I do not know how often we make the reference architecture changes, so let me circle back to you on that one. And then we should probably discuss async. So we have others chime in as well. What should be the path? I would assume at this point, when the infra team is going towards from pre to staging, that was a good time when we do it in sync with staging ref as well. So that we could go in sync with it. And before it goes to production canary, the changes that has to go in from infrastructure point of view for staging ref.
Great, thanks, Vincy. Like, would the idea be that we update the reference architecture, or that staging ref deviates off the reference architecture?
And that's what I would want to understand better, like how often we do it in staging ref. But for now, at this point, a lot of people are not using staging ref, so it's not much of a concern, but the long term, definitely it will be. So let's come up with a plan that would work best, that is just done one time and not like a deviation to staging ref versus reference architecture. Ideally, it should be a reference architecture, but I do not know how often we do it yet. So let me go back on that one and I'll get back to you. Yep.
Okay, great. That makes sense. Thanks for that. I think this fits in with kind of conversation we've had here earlier around Nginx and HA proxy, and where do we sit in terms of like, you know, like recommendations to users versus what we do on GitLab.com.
Amy, just a quick question there. Is the change for the sake of performance, and do we see those changes eventually going into a recommendation in the future?
We have no process for that at the moment, but probably, yeah, that's probably what
Okay.
we also want to tie to this. Like, I imagine that users may be interested in, why did we change? What experience do we have? But I don't believe we have any way of linking that together yet.
Okay. Yeah, I'm supportive of using all-out stagings to improve the forward plan of reference architectures if there are changes. And this is something that will eventually be a permanent change in the reference architectures. I think those are really reasonable. I think within the confinements of reference architecture, if the staging of those reference architectures is our testing grounds for future enhancements, I think that's a great storyline to tell. But if it's an exception that we only do it for us, then I think we should dive into to further understand the changes. So yeah, overall guidelines to help.
Sounds good. Okay, that's the end of the agenda today. Anything else? Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Great updates, all. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.